Buenos dias. I apologize, it's the last of my Spanish. So I'm here today to talk to you about numbers, not engineering numbers, but dollar numbers, because parks and green infrastructure have a large value that can be measured and should be communicated to elected officials so that they will invest in parks and green infrastructure. And the reason I say that is because that's what the Trust for Public Land does. We believe that a relationship between people and nature is critical for healthy people and a healthy landscape. So I'm going to give you a brief overview of the Trust for Public Land and how we do that. And then I'm really going to jump into what are the economic benefits of parks, how might we measure those, what data are required to do so, and then I'm going to give you an example calculation with the results and compare it to what we've done across the country. Then I'll try to draw some conclusions at the end. So, the Trust for Public Land, we create parks and conserve land for people. And one of the ways we do that, and the ways that I do that, is helping to create public funding for parks and conservation. You need money. And to do that, you need to convince elected officials of the value. And one way we do that is talking about the economic benefits. We also help plan by bringing the community together to identify and prioritize lands to conserve important parks and conservation lands. We actually do the protection, acquiring land from tiny pocket parks to vast backcountry expanses. And we create parks by engaging with the community in designing and building innovative parks. So now on to what I do. The audience for economic analyses generally tends to be elected officials who are trying to get to create, protect, or enhance public funding for conservation in parks. You will see a smattering of the studies that we've done in the past. Not all of these are actually completed. I was really hoping to talk to you today about Tucson, Arizona, but the report is not publicly released, so I can't, but it should be coming soon. We have done studies all over the United States in cities and counties, and those are the stars that you see. The green in the states are state-level analyses where we've conducted return on investment analyses for public funding for conservation programs. So this slide is just to highlight, we know what we're talking about. We've done this all over the place. I think sometimes people think, oh, you're an advocacy organization, of course you think parks are good. Well, we think parks are good because they are good, and they bring lots and lots of benefits to the communities. Benefits like enhanced property value, reduced stormwater runoff, which I don't think I have to tell anyone here that, air pollution removal, bringing tourists to the community, recreational use by residents, health of residents, economic development, and community cohesion. These are the benefits that we quantify in our analyses. So the first thing I ask anyone who wants an economic analysis is, who is your audience and what are you trying to get them to do? I would like to think that I'm a magician and everything I do makes perfect sense, but it's very important for you to consider who you are talking to and what it is you're trying to get them to do at the end of the day. Often, economic research is most persuasive to elected officials. These are the folks who are either going to fund projects or put funding out to the ballot for people to vote on. The reason why I go with property value first is it's a very concrete example of a benefit that local officials can understand, because not only is the market value of a home near a park or trail higher than that same home, same number of bedrooms, same square footage, same lot size would be if it wasn't near a park or a trail. And this is where the public official really likes to hear it. That increase in property value means increased property tax revenues to the municipality. They like more property tax revenues. I always say your audience is important, because when you're talking to a homeowner, you don't say, guess what? You have higher property taxes. You tell them, guess what? Your home is worth more, and when you go to sell it, you're going to get a higher price, and it's going to sell faster. So again, I talk a lot about audience, but we have to be clear on who we're speaking to and how we talk about these benefits. So we know from the literature that protecting parks and open space increases property value, but those values vary. The magnitude of the impact has been shown to be up to 20% for parks. So that means that a home near a park will sell up to 20% at a higher price, or for trails, 14%. We at the Trust for Public Land are conservative because we want to make sure we are not overestimating the value. When we say we use 5%, we say that's conservative. We're using the lower bound. And that is because we want to be as rock solid in the results as possible so people can't poke holes on it. People will say, oh, I see a 0 in your report. Your report's worth nothing. I throw it away. So we want to make sure we're conservative in how we talk about these things so that we are measuring the baseline floor value. So we use a 5% premium. That premium has been shown to be up to 20%. So this is at least 5%. The impact has been measured up to 2,000 feet from a park or trail, and we use 500 feet. So again, we're being very conservative. Let's see if I can do this. So this is a park, this rectangle here in Kansas, and the purple that you see are all of the homes that are within 500 feet. Obviously, this is a GIS analysis. So this property value analysis can be measured if you have some GIS layers. You need to know what's the city boundary. So what municipality are you measuring and where are you cutting that off? We sometimes call that the cookie cutter. We're dealing with this in Colorado Springs right now in Colorado. They have parks outside of their city boundary. I don't know why they bought parks outside of their city boundary, but they have. We're not measuring those because they're not in the city. You need to know where the parks and trails are. Sounds simple. It is often not. The first conversation we have with the community is, what are your parks and trails? What do you want to include? What do you want to measure? Golf courses, yes or no. Natural areas, yes or no. Small tot lots or playgrounds, yes or no. So we go through the list with them and decide what parks and trails do they want to count. Then we need to know all of the homes. So we actually plot out every home. We need to know its market value, its assessed value, and its property tax structure. So to be able to understand the property value increase, you need to know the market value, and to understand property taxes, you have to understand the property taxes. We have done this in 19 cities and counties across the United States. This is just a list of those. I will not go through it, nor do I expect you to memorize it. But what we're going to talk about today is Pinal County, Arizona. For those of you who are unfamiliar, Pinal County is the county above Pima, which is Tucson, and below Maricopa, which is Phoenix. So it's the in-between county, which is expected to grow quite rapidly over the next 20 years. So in Pinal County, we measured what is the market value of all of the homes that are within 500 feet of parks. And we estimated that to be $3.8 billion, billion with a B. Again, that assumed park premium is 5%, meaning there's an additional market value of $190 million. That's a one-time value, meaning your property value bumps up and it goes constant through time, but it doesn't add. So you don't get an extra $10,000 one year, another $10,000 the next year for a total of $20,000. It goes up by $10,000, and that carries through the future. What is annual and accrues each and every year is the additional property tax revenue due to parks that is collected by Pinal County at $2.72 million. So big numbers. An additional nearly $3 million a year just because homes are near parks. It is tricky to compare Pinal to the other communities on that list, those 18 other communities, based on how cities assess value and how they tax property. For example, some cities rely mainly on a sales tax, not a property tax. Generally speaking, however, Pinal is on the lower end of the property tax revenue because it relies heavily on other taxing structures. Reduce stormwater. This one, I think I will be repeating things to this room. Parks and trails can reduce the costs of stormwater management by capturing precipitation and slowing its runoff. We work with the University of California, Davis, who models for us the volume of water that is retained by parks above and beyond that which would be retained if the parks were developed similar to the surrounding region. So that's just the incremental benefit of the park versus the surrounding landscape, not the total volume of water that is captured by the parks. Unfortunately, this is not a publicly available model. It is proprietary and it is run for us. Once we know the volume of water, the additional volume of water that's captured by parks and trails, then we estimate the cost of treating that volume of water. So what is the avoided management cost of not having that volume of water go into the stormwater system? This is also a GIS analysis. So you can see here that this is a park highlighted in green. Then through the park there's a road, so that's impervious surface, but most of the park is pervious. So again, you need to know what your parks and your trails are, and then you need to know your surface permeability or percent impervious surface and your land cover. And that's the easy part. The model's the easy part. The harder part tends to be what is the cost of treatment per cubic foot. We have done this in 15 communities across the United States. And I'm going to talk to you about Johnson County, Kansas. So Johnson County, Kansas has 16,200 acres of park with pervious soil. So that's 94% permeable. The typical rainfall is 34 inches. With parks, there is a reduction in runoff of 206 million cubic feet in an average year, and that's a statistically average year. So it reduces runoff by 64%. The cost of treating that stormwater was determined based on best management practices like low impact development that are required for new and redevelopment at 4 cents per cubic foot. So the total cost savings for stormwater in just one average year is nearly $9 million. That's in the middle of the range of places that we've worked. As you can guess, the inputs, things like the permeability of the parks, the average rainfall, really affect, and also the cost of treatment, really affect the total savings by parks. So the lowest value we have was from Denver, which was $76 per park acre, and the highest was Boston, Massachusetts, at a whopping $5,500 per acre. We are working to expand this methodology to include green infrastructure, but right now it's just looking at the permeability of the parks and trails compared to the surrounding region. Air pollution removal by vegetation is our last GIS-based benefit. So we know that trees and shrubs and parks improve air quality by removing pollutants, including carbon monoxide, nitrogen dioxide, ozone, particulate matter, and sulfur dioxide. We estimate the cost savings of pollutants not entering the atmosphere based on 2 U.S. Forest Service models that were created specifically for the Trust for Public Land. It's a combination of the Forest Service's U4 model and iTree model. The iTree model is publicly available, and you can use it to calculate the benefits of air pollution removal. As I mentioned, it's a GIS-based analysis. You need to know where your park is and your tree cover canopy and your type. We have done this in 15 communities across the United States, and I'm going to talk about Cleveland, Ohio. So Cleveland, Ohio has poor ambient air quality compared to most of the communities that we've worked in. What that means is they have a higher level of air pollution in their air. So I'm going to do a spoiler here. The $14.4 million of benefit is actually on the high end. So what we have found is that in Cleveland, the Metro Park system is removing nearly 2,000 tons of air pollution each and every year. And the benefits are calculated in 2 ways. Reduced adverse health incidences, asthma attacks. So it's the EPA's BENMAP program, looks at the actual community in Cleveland, Ohio. So it looks at the population density and the population of Cleveland, Ohio to estimate the healthcare cost savings of those reduced adverse health impacts. For those pollutants that don't cause things like asthma attacks, it looks at the cost of mechanically or industrial of removing that same tonnage of pollutants. So if you had to install a scrubber on your smokestack, how much would that cost per ton? So the tree cover canopy in Cleveland of 15,200 acres is providing $14 million in benefit each and every year. As I mentioned, Cleveland is on the higher end of the spectrum at $645 per acre, and the low end was Denver at $21 per acre. Tourism, this is not a GIS-based analysis. It is a measurement of those visitors who are coming to a community and spending money because they are visiting parks. These are non-residents. These aren't people who are living here. These are people who are coming from outside of the community to spend money because of the park system. So how do you measure this? Well, first you need to know how many people are coming, how many people are coming because of parks and trails, and how much they spend. We've done this in 17 communities across the country. And I'm going to talk about San Diego, California. So in San Diego, they get a lot of visitors. They get nearly 28 million visitors per year. Of those, 20% visit parks, so 5.6 million. Those who visited primarily because of the parks are another additional subset of 26%, so 1.4 million people come each and every year primarily for parks. So those are not people who are coming to visit their family and happen to go to a park. Those are people who are coming specifically for an event or to recreate in the park. So we know there's the 1.4 million who are visiting because of parks, and we know their breakdown between day and overnight visitors. So we know that they spend $114 million each year because of parks tourism. So these are just people who are coming to a community to visit the parks. And of great interest to public officials is how much additional sales tax is coming in because of that spending. So this is all new money that's coming into the community. This is bonus money. This is not residents who could spend the money on something else. This is visitors who would spend their money in a different community. And this is the additional property tax. So this goes to business owners and restaurants and hotels. And this is going to the city coffers. the $8.6 million per year. San Diego actually tends to be in the mid-range of the 16 other communities that we've studied. For example, San Francisco was $820 million a year. But it depends on the overall level of tourism to a city and the types of amenities and events in the park system. I don't think anybody would be sad about an additional $114 million a year. So that was tourists. Those are people who are coming from outside of the community to engage in recreation. What about residents who are able to go to a park or trail and engage in an activity at low or no cost? That has a value to those residents who are able to engage in those activities at low or no cost. And I say low cost, for example, if there's an entry fee at the swimming pool, we take that into account. So we estimate the value using Oregon State University's Recreation Use Values Database, which is a hard thing to say quickly. And what that database does is it looks at a host of activities: swimming, biking, hiking, running, walking the dog, and it assigns a dollar value to those activities. So it's a consumer surplus value. And it is broken out regionally. So it would look at different places and the different values to those communities. And so we look first at the database to see if there are any studies that exist to estimate the value, and you can get that here on their website. They're currently in the process of updating it. It should be out by the end of the year. They update it rather frequently. We also look at the market rates. So increasingly in the United States, you can buy recreation in the private market. You can join a soccer league. You could pay to join a soccer league and compete at a private facility. There's private golf courses and municipal golf courses. So we look at the difference between the cost to buy this on the private market, join a soccer league for a private facility, versus if you join a soccer league that's hosted by your city. And we look at the cost difference. So that's just direct savings to you by not having to pay that higher market rate. And this is all supported. So sometimes people think this is a theoretical value. Well, people don't actually have to pay that money. They save that money. Well, I always figure that if the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers says it's a real value, you can be pretty confident that they're not the most liberal parks-loving organization out there. So it is a real methodology. It is a real value, not a theoretical value. How do we go about doing this? So we just talked about how we get the value per activity, but how do you know what people are doing? You have to do a telephone survey, and I call it my 20 questions. So what it is actually 40 questions. We ask, we have a survey vendor who calls a statistically representative sample of residents in the community and ask them how they're using their park and recreation system. And the 20 questions are the 20 different activities that are specific to that place. So in a beach community, you'll talk about going to the beach. If you don't have a beach, you don't ask about, do you go to the beach? It's 20 questions, 20 activities that are specific to that community. And it can be, again, walking, biking, taking the children to the playground, whatever 20 activities are most important to that community. And we ask them, how often do you go per week for things like going to the playground? And we ask them number of times per year for things like the large Christmas in the Park event or the Lotus Festival. Anything that happens less frequently, we ask on an annual basis. And once we know that, we know who's going to the park and how they're using the parks. We cross-check that with park and recreation activity counts. So if the city pool has a clicker and counts how many people go in, we make sure that the self-reported swimming fits with the number of clicks at the swimming pools. We've done this for 18 communities across the country, and I'm going to talk about Fort Worth, Lake Worth, and Lakeside, Texas, which was a single analysis. So general park use are those uses that don't require specialized equipment. So to golf, you need equipment. To walk, you do not. That is the breakdown. So as you can see, the park uses that don't require equipment are much higher than the park uses that do require equipment. However, nearly just over 6.2 million visits occur each and every year. The value, and this value is specific to the recreational activities that are engaged in by those residents in the value. So you can't apply the $2.58 to your community. It would be specific to your community and the types of recreation your residents engage in. Results in an annual value of $16.1 million per year. This is actually on the lower end of the values that we've seen in other communities. This tends to be because in Texas, there's a very large private market. People belong to country clubs or engage in their recreation in private facilities and use public facilities less often, generally speaking. Again, it's still a lot of visits and a lot of value, but this does tend to be on the lower end of the values that we have seen. And this, so we talked about the recreational use of residents of parks, and then I want to talk about improved health for those residents. We are measuring health benefits as active recreational use. This is separate from and distinct from the health benefits of just being in nature and near green that Dr. Kuo discussed in her presentation yesterday. So that would be additional benefits to what I'm talking about here today. So again, you had a presentation yesterday, so it's clear that when people have access to parks and trails, they are healthier. When they exercise more in those places, they are healthier. We estimate the medical care cost savings for people who are actively engaging in recreation in their community by using Center for Disease Control guidelines, which are 75 minutes of vigorous activity per week or 150 minutes of moderate activity per week, and 2 strengthening days, weightlifting days, but those are the CDC guidelines. Then we estimate the annual healthcare cost savings for adults who are exercising regularly. So that's $1,180 per year for those who are 18 to 64, and $2,360 for those over the age of 65. We use that same statistically valid telephone survey that we use to estimate recreational use to understand how people are engaging in their parks. So it's the number of visits, what types of activities they're engaging in, and how long they're engaging in those activities. We've done this for 17 communities across the country. And I'm going to talk about San Jose. I guess I should mention that these are not in alphabetical order, they're in chronological order. So that is why it looks a little strange. So in Santa Fe, we looked at the number of adults 18 to 64 who are actively engaging in parks, and that's 22,500 people. And an additional 1,570 adults over the age of 65 are actively engaging in recreation in parks each and every year, for a total of 24,000. It's not uncommon for adults over the age of 65 to be lower. There have been studies that show that in general, adults over the age of 65 are less actively engaged in parks. So the total health care benefits associated with, again, just active recreational use, not all that great, wonderful stuff that Dr. Kuo was talking about yesterday, is $28.3 million per year. Unfortunately, unfortunately, it's difficult to compare to past studies because recently the Center for Disease Control changed their guidelines. So it's not directly comparable to older studies. But I think I'll just say that the perception of health as a benefit of parks has changed over the last 10 years. And people now are understanding that connection a lot more. And whereas this part of the analysis tended to elicit a mild nod, like, okay, that makes sense. Now, when I present this to park systems, they are vehement that their numbers are higher. How can it be so low? Healthcare costs are increasing. We know there are people out there all the time engaging in recreation. We think our numbers should be higher. They're right. We saw a presentation yesterday that talks about these numbers are higher. This is the floor. This is the bottom. At least $28.3 million per year. And hopefully, as the methodologies improve and the research improves, we'll be able to quantify those other benefits, other health benefits. Economic development is an area of benefit that people are asking about more and more. They want to know about the connection of parks and trails to making the place that they live better and creating and attracting jobs. What does this mean for jobs? So I like to think of it more as quality of life. How is it that parks and trails and recreational facilities are part of the community that attracts people who want to live there? So skilled workers who have a choice in where they live and work are going to go to those places that offer open space, clean air, clean water, recreational opportunities for them and their families. And businesses who want to retain and recruit the best workers are also going to move to those places. We are fortunate that we have been able to use a new type of data, GIS data from ESRI called Business Analyst. And it looks at the things like number of jobs, income, spending by industry. So previously, we had to rely on available information about quality of life. Awards that have been won, business leaders who will quote that they moved to the community because of the park system. They built their new corporate complex next to the trail because they wanted their workers to be able to commute in by bike. That was I call it squishy. We had the squishy connection before, but now we're actually able to measure this. However, we haven't done it in a lot of places yet. We've only been able to do it in 5 places. And I wanted to talk about the Great Rivers Greenway. And the Great Rivers Greenway is actually in St. Louis, and it is an economic development strategy of creating a greenway system in the city of St. Louis County, and St. Charles County in Missouri. So we can actually look at what is the population that's near the greenways, and we looked at an easy bike ride, 1.5 miles. How many people live within that area? And then how does that relate to the types of businesses who would service that population? So there are 773,000 people who are within 1.5 miles of the existing greenway. So 46% of the population. However, there's a higher percentage and number of the bike-related businesses, employees of bike-related businesses, and sales at bike-related businesses. So we can say, based on the population, there's higher jobs and higher spending in those industries that support greenways. And we're beginning to do this now in additional communities. We're working on it in Colorado Springs, but we're in the early stages. But we're really excited to be able to show this because people are interested in jobs and sales and taxes. So using the ESRI business analyst data, we're able to do that. The last category of benefit I wanted to talk about is related to economic development. And this is the traditional benefit that we have used called community cohesion. And that is parks are essential to building community. And Dr. Kuo also talked about that yesterday. Providing a safe place for people to interact, grow, and learn. The way that we measure this is we actually look at what are people contributing to their community through parks. So we're looking at volunteer hours and financial contributions that are made by those organizations. So is a business donating materials? Are friends groups raising money and volunteer hours? So we look at the direct financial contributions to parks, but we also look at the value of the volunteer hour. So we use that value of a volunteer hour that's identified by the independent sector. Here is the link to that, and that is place specific. We have done this in 13 communities across the country, and I'm going to talk about San Francisco. So San Francisco, nearly $55 million a year are donated to the park system. It has a large culture of Friends of Parks groups. And there are 442,000 hours of time that are donated annually, with a value of $11.7 million. So the parks in the city of San Francisco receive each and every year $66.6 million in direct contributions and volunteer time. That's nearly $81 per resident are donated to the park system. And that's on the high end. On the lower end is Denver at about $3 per resident. Some of that is a culture of friends groups, and some of that is population and number of parks. I just wanted to contextualize it. Even in California, it's wildly different. This was different in San Jose, and it's different in Los Angeles on how much is being donated to the park system. It's not a perfect measurement of community cohesion, but it does illustrate that it has value. I think that that is one of the conclusions that I want to leave you with today, is that parks are an investment, not a luxury. These benefits contribute to the economy and can be measured. They might not be a perfect measurement, but they are a start in talking and changing the conversation on how parks are not a net draw on the economy, they add to it. They result in benefits of millions of dollars per year. As you can see, this is just a summary of those benefits that we talked about here today and their magnitude. And as we talked about them, some are higher and some are lower in different cities. I didn't pick the highest. I tried to pick communities that were as representative as possible. So I was trying to pick border states, and in some places we didn't have that data. And I was also trying to pick communities that we had more recently done the research. I figures 10 years ago, a lot has changed in the last 10 years. So I didn't want to talk about studies that were done 10 years ago. So I didn't cherry pick the highest, and I didn't go with the lowest. I tried to go with something that was a bit more representative. I think that sometimes people think economic information is a magic bullet. I caution that. I think it's an additional tool in the toolbox to talk about the investment in a community and get elected officials to support parks. Sometimes they just want cover. You know, they want to support parks or green infrastructure, but they're afraid that they're going to get pushback from other worthy needs in the community. So parks get put on the back burner, or green infrastructure gets put on the back burner. But if you give them information, economic information about how this is important to the economy, then they say, great, now we can go for it. Now we can fund these projects. Now we can do these things that we've always wanted to do, because we know that parks make our community and green infrastructure makes our community better. But now that I have a number behind it, we can move forward. You would still talk about all the things that you've always talked about before and support of parks and green infrastructure. But this is another way to talk about it and start to change the conversation around it being a drain or an expense. It's an investment. We have to invest in these things to grow our communities. And I'm just going to leave you, I know I gave you a lot of numbers and a lot of information. All of these reports are available on our website, and that's my contact information. If you have any questions that we aren't able to get to today, or again, there's a lot of nitty gritty. I'm a numbers nerd. I like to talk about these things. Feel free to shoot me an email. Thank you.